Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome again. My name is Rachel Dial, and I am the Assistant Director of the Rutland Institute for Ethics here at Clemson, and this is our third annual Ethics Day, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. We want to take this time to thank the U.S. Surgeon General's office for taking the time to join us this afternoon amongst his very busy schedule. We'd also like to take the time to thank some of our sponsors, ANMed Health, Clemson's Office of Inclusion and Equity, and Clemson's Pan-African Studies program. The support has helped make all of this possible. We're fortunate to have ANMed as partners with us today, and Ms. Wanda Slade, who serves as the Chief Diversity Officer, and along with their new CEO, William Kinley, both have a brief greeting for us on the screens.
Hello, Clemson. We're pleased to be a part of this year's lecture, and we offer a special welcome to Dr. Jerome Adams to upstate South Carolina. The last 7 months have been perilous and unprecedented times. Hospitals and health systems all across the country have been challenged as never before. I personally have been inspired by the brave frontline workers of ANMed Health who continue to take care of patients every day in the face of COVID-19. Now, while we have all been affected, they are the true heroes. This organization has a long-standing history of diversity and inclusion, dating back to Dr. William H. Young, the very first African-American member of our medical staff, Dr. Ann Young, the first female member of our medical staff, and Dr. Eddie Joyce Green, our first African-American nursing leader. However, in 2001, ANMed Health made history, becoming only the second health system in the state to dedicate full-time resources to effective diversity management. Today, the legacy continues under the leadership of our new Chief Executive Officer, Mr. William Kinley. William?
Thank you, Anna. I'm glad that ANMed Health can support this important conversation. I joined the ANMed Health team last month. My wife Carol and I are glad to be part of the Anderson and upstate South Carolina region. We're honored to have joined an organization that is engaged, committed, and invested in the work of diversity, inclusion, and health equity. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's documented by the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on people and communities of color. We must address societal factors that influence health far beyond the walls of our 4 hospitals and 50 physician practices. Every employee must have an opportunity to succeed and contribute. Every patient, every time, must have a positive experience, and healthcare must begin before patients enter our doors and continue long after they've left, all with efficiency and accuracy. So to President James Clements and Dr. William McCoy, Director of Pan-African Studies, we appreciate this partnership and thank you for including our voice in this important event. At ANMed Health, we're truly in this together.
And now we'll bring up Dr. Curtis White, our MC for the afternoon.
Thank you, Rachel. The Rutland Institute for Ethics is blessed to have dynamic leaders who make up its advisory board. We have all been challenged by this time of uncertainty and turbulence, yet the board continues to weather the storm through ethical decision-making and ethical leadership. We're fortunate to have with us today Mr. Kelly Durham, Clemson University alumni and chair of the Rutland Institute for Ethics Advisory Board. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Kelly to the stage.
Thank you, Curtis. Curtis and I are classmates. Not only that, but we were ROTC cadets together, so he's somebody that I have long respected. So thank you very much, Curtis. 58 years ago, the world was transfixed by what came to be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. In October 1962, at the height of the crisis, President Kennedy met with his key advisors, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to discuss what would happen and what their actions should be. During the course of one of those discussions, General David Shoup, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, looked at Kennedy and said, "You are in a pretty bad fix, Mr. President." Kennedy looked back at him and said, "You are in it with me." You know, this pandemic is a reminder that we are all in this together, that the actions of any single one of us affect so many more of us. And I think there's never been a time when it was more important to engage in ethical interactions with each other. I think that's what makes Clemson University's focus on ethics so timely and the efforts of the Rutland Institute so vital. But you know, the truth is that not very many people are going to come knocking on our door and say, "Teach me about ethics." We have to go and we have to reach out to our students. And when I say students, I'm really talking about students in the generic sense of the word, not just the students that we find in a scholastic or a collegiate classroom or online, but business leaders and elected officials and laborers and healthcare workers, ministers, teachers, you name it. So that's why I'm proud of the outreach efforts of Bill McCoy, Rachel Dial, Landon Hedrick, and their student colleagues, their business partners, and their academic partners. Because the true measure of our effectiveness is not how smart we are or how smart we think we are. The true measure of our effectiveness is how well we use our intellect and our other gifts to serve others and to create a better world. So to our Rutland Institute staff, thank you very much for your efforts. To our friends of the Institute, please continue your high level of support so that we can fulfill Bob Rutland's founding vision of spreading ethics education not only across our campus, but across our society. Because you know what, folks? We really are all in this together. Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Clemson University's Provost, Dr. Bob Jones.
We have to learn new protocols all the time. Thank you very much, Kelly. And let me also thank you, Mr. Rutland, for your concept and starting this all so many years ago. Brilliant idea, and your continued engagement and leadership in this. And Bill McCoy, thank you for picking up the ropes and pulling and pushing and moving us along and doing such a great job of that in many other ways for the whole university. We're really glad we stole you from Illinois. I want to see that Clemson University logo grow in your mind and that Illinois one shrink a little bit maybe. Okay. Well, you know, President Clements was unable to make it today, but he told me to tell you how grateful he is for your activities in this institute and the impact that it's having. You know, the Rutland Institute for Ethics has been an established center for 20 years. And it's done just a fantastic job of helping people. It helps students understand the importance of ethical decision making and ethical leadership as well. I'm particularly proud of the progress the Institute has made over the past several years instituting cutting-edge programs, such as the Distinguished Ethics Scholars Program and the Tigers for Inclusion, Diversity and Ethics Conference. These, plus influencing our faculty, helping them understand how to bring ethics into the classroom, are just really elevating the idea of ethical decision-making as it's become a core of value for Clemson, and that has strengthened over the years, thanks in large part because of your efforts. It's also outstanding that the Institute is now reaching out to high schools, and that outreach component is what land-grant universities do, and you're helping them become more aware of how important it is to have ethics as part of training at earlier ages. The university stands shoulder to shoulder with the goals of the Institute, and we look forward to helping this great organization in its vision of excellence and in finding new resources to help grow your research, your reach, and your influence. Today, we're fortunate to have with us a very distinguished national leader, the 20th Surgeon General of the United States, Vice Admiral Jerome Adams. With a Master of Public Health degree from UC Berkeley, a medical doctorate from the University of Indiana, and appointments in academia and in the military and in government health services, he is a natural to be a leader in health care and public health sciences. And in his role, it demands the utmost of ethical standards. As the Surgeon General, Dr. Adams has shown tremendous leadership to help us address pressing and very challenging health problems, including the opioid epidemic, which has touched virtually every family in the United States and in much of the world, oral health, and the links between community health, economic prosperity, and national security. Like many health professionals and leaders, he is now deeply engaged in our global pandemic, dealing with COVID-19 daily. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerome Adams.
Well, hello, everyone. Just confirming that you can hear and see me? All right. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at Clemson's annual Ethics Day. I am honored to virtually connect with you all and provide some updates regarding the work in my office, efforts around COVID-19, and some ethical challenges associated with the pandemic. For those of you who are unaware, prior to becoming the 20th United States Surgeon General, I ran the State Department of Health in Indiana. While there, I experienced quite the ethical conundrum. I oversaw the response to the largest ever national outbreak of HIV, and this one was related to injection drug use. Despite syringe service programs being illegal in the state of Indiana at the time, many advocates and academicians wanted me to wield the mantle of science as a sledgehammer and to use my authority to force adoption of a syringe service program in the small rural Indiana community of Scott County. But I knew that if I did that, I'd lose community buy-in and cooperation. In fact, an out-of-state advocacy group came down to the town from Chicago and passed out about 50,000 needles. When the local community found out about this, it actually derailed much of the progress we had made with the community on a syringe service program. And instead of distributing syringes, we had to hit the pause button for about a week until local law enforcement were satisfied they'd collected all the illegal syringes. One of my favorite sayings is people need to know you care before they care what you know. And in the small town of Scott County, Indiana, they didn't think that we cared. They thought that the rest of the world was laughing at them, that the rest of the world thought they were a bunch of backwoods yokels who didn't know anything, and worse. The fact is, I learned that we had to form strategic partnerships with local stakeholders and be willing to compromise with the community for the greater good. I appreciated the medical and scientific support I got, but I also needed the support of the local sheriff's department, the local business community, and local faith leaders. The discussions we had were not always comfortable or easy, but together and respectfully, we were able to determine an evidence-based approach to address everyone's concerns and provide the community with solutions to overcome the outbreak. We had to work our way through the ethical issues that many people have surrounding the use of syringe service programs. But we also had to work our way through the ethical issues of people who don't live in a community trying to make and impose controversial decisions for those who do live in those communities. And despite that example leading to the opening of scores of syringe service programs across the Midwest, Kentucky now has over 50 syringe service programs based on Indiana's law, and it's sparking new federal funding for SSPs based on our new language when we legalize syringe service programs in the state. Some people, not the people who actually live in that town, mind you, still accuse me personally of inaction and say that I cost lives. Public health professionals have often told other people how to solve their problems without actually asking them about their concerns. Now, one of the things I want you all to take home from this conversation today is that especially when it comes to complex moral and ethical interventions, and let's face it, There's very little in health right now that isn't in the category of moral or ethical interventions for some, whether it's talking about guns or whether it's talking about abortion rights or whether it's talking about whether or not people should receive health care as a right. The fact is, it's critical that we listen to the community and that we acknowledge and address their concerns. Because if we don't show them that we care, they're not going to care about what we know. But that's not what you expected me to talk about today, and that's not why I'm here today. So let's talk a little bit more about COVID-19. For those of you in healthcare and those of you working on the front lines, and let's face it, COVID has shown that your grocery store worker, your Uber driver, many of those people are on the front lines. I want to thank you for your dedication in keeping Americans safe and well in these truly unprecedented times. And to the students, I know this is not how you anticipated spending a year or two of your college experience, but I want you to know this too shall pass. We have been through difficult times in this country before. If you think back to World War II, that was several years where people were disrupted much more than what our lives have been disrupted right now. And that generation is what we refer to as our greatest generation because of the adversities they not only faced, but overcame. But I want you to understand, if we do want to overcome this, if you want to continue watching Clemson football, if you want to get back to spring break one day, if you want to keep your classmates and their families safe, especially as we come upon the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, then please keep up your diligence. Unfortunately, we're seeing cases rise, hospitalizations rise. And if you go to my Twitter right now, at surgeon_general, I just tweeted out a CDC report that talked about how the virus is now spreading amongst younger people for several weeks, in many cases silently, because young people are more likely to be asymptomatic. But those young people are inevitably passing it along through their networks to older people and people who are vulnerable. So now you're seeing hospitalizations and deaths increase up to a month or more after initial spread in communities amongst younger people. But if you want to help slow the spread of this disease, practice my 3 W's: wash your hands, wear a mask, and I've got mine right here, and watch your distance, meaning avoid crowded indoor spaces and try to maintain 6 feet from other people. COVID-19 has turned our world upside down, and it's left its mark on each and every one of you. Many have lost loved ones and livelihoods, and there is now a spotlight on the disparities in health that have long been hiding in plain sight in communities all across the country. This pandemic has especially impacted people of color and older Americans, as well as those with chronic medical conditions such as obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and lung disease. The reasons for this are many, but we must remember they're rooted in social conditions that conspire to reduce our resilience, our opportunity, and our health. What we've observed in COVID-19 are the significant gaps in both equality and in equity in communities when it comes to social determinants of health. As an example, American Indians and Alaska Natives, as well as African Americans, have been hospitalized at 5 times a higher rate than whites. Hospitalization rates are 4.5 times higher for Hispanics compared to whites. Part of the reason for this are pre-existing medical conditions common in people of color, but we've got to dig a little bit deeper. We also know minorities are more likely to live in densely packed urban areas and in multi-generational homes. They're more likely to use public transportation. They're less likely to have the ability to work remotely. 1 in 5 African Americans and 1 in 6 Hispanics has a job that allows them to telework. These factors create a much greater risk for spread of a highly contagious disease like COVID-19. So we really shouldn't be surprised when we learn that it's disproportionately hitting certain communities. You see, when we think of COVID-19 or of health in general, we usually think about healthcare. But while healthcare is critical, we know that health actually begins at home. in communities designed to provide income and financial security, education, safe and affordable housing, and access to transportation. And healthy communities are communities that are free of structural and institutional barriers related to race and to bias. So I ask you, what are the ethical concerns of our current status quo, which uses your taxpayer money to subsidize a healthcare system that is not only the most expensive in the world, but also delivers some of the worst results when you compare us to others? And largely because we wait for people to get sick to intervene versus addressing and funding wellness, which we actually have many studies to demonstrate is a much cheaper and more effective way of dealing with bending our healthcare cost curve. There are also ethical dilemmas when it comes to addressing one health problem at the expense of the other. The pandemic has revealed the harmful effects of physical distancing, for instance, a tactic that we strongly recommend in order to slow spread of coronavirus. Physical separation is effective to reduce the risk of infection, but we know it often leads to social isolation, which is causing our already poor collective mental health as a nation to suffer further. Many of you know that an American life is lost by suicide roughly every 11 minutes in this country. We also know that the pandemic and the shutdowns and caused by it have caused many people to lose their jobs. Well, every 1% increase in unemployment is correlated with a 1.3% increase in suicides. So while we do one thing to slow the spread of the virus, we may be squeezing the balloon only to see it pop up in another area that could take someone's life for a different reason. As the nation's doctor, I've always stressed that our mental health is just as important to our well-being as our physical health. We can't have one without the other. And that's why I remain steadfast in encouraging Americans, and especially college students, to use healthy mechanisms to cope and to band together to practice tried and true habits that will help keep us safe and healthy in mind, body, and in spirit. Make sure you're getting outside and staying active in a safe and socially distanced manner. Make sure you're trying to eat healthy so that you can boost your immune system. We joke about the freshman 15, but many of us establish eating habits while we're in college that follow us throughout the rest of our lives. That's something that can impact your ability to be resilient right now in the midst of COVID and flu season, but it will also impact your ability to live a long and healthy life far into the future. Reach out to friends and family over FaceTime and try virtual therapy if you need someone to talk to. And stay up to date on your own health appointments, many of which now can be done through telemedicine. In other office-related news that highlights how the pandemic is causing us to focus on one problem at the expense of others, I want you to know that last week I released a call to action to improve hypertension or high blood pressure control. Hypertension is common and it's costly, but it's controllable. Many medications are generic. We know more than ever before about how to keep your blood pressure under control, yet control rates are not just stalled, they're going in the wrong direction, especially in people of color. Uncontrolled high blood pressure leads to what we see now as rising rates of heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, heart failure, maternal morbidity and mortality. And you can't turn on the TV without seeing an advertisement for a little blue pill out there. Uncontrolled hypertension leads to sexual and reproductive health issues. I want you to know that the diseases I named collectively are preventable, but they will cause far more deaths than COVID will this year. Cardiovascular disease alone kills 600,000 people every year. High blood pressure is listed as a primary or secondary cause of death on 500,000, 500,000 death certificates every year. So if you've already been diagnosed with high blood pressure, don't wait. It's never too early to speak to your doctor or nurse about getting your blood pressure under control. Students, next time you're at the Student Health Center, talk to them about ways you can keep your blood pressure under control, even if you haven't been diagnosed yet. Again, healthy eating habits, making sure you're staying active. If you're an older adult, Learn about out-of-office blood pressure monitoring with clinical support so that you can know your numbers. Go to surgeongeneral.gov for more info and to read my call to action. I'm actually looking around now. I don't have it within reach, but I actually have high blood pressure, and I keep my blood pressure monitoring cuff. I keep one in the office and one at home so that I can know my numbers. And finally, with everyone hunkering down at home, we expect quite a few COVID babies in the coming months. But more than 700 women die around the time of childbirth each year, and 100 times that amount have pregnancy complications. Unfortunately, women of color suffer more complications and a much higher risk of dying. The death of a woman from pregnancy-related causes is one of the greatest tragedies that can befall a family and a community. And the shocking reality is that about 2/3 of these deaths are preventable. Healthy motherhood begins far before birth and even before pregnancy. Unfortunately, in the midst of COVID-19, we know many women are foregoing regular checkups and even prenatal care. That's why I'm putting out a call to action on maternal health, which takes a life course approach and makes sure women are mentally and physically healthy if and when they decide to have children of their own. So stay tuned for my call to action in the coming weeks and take steps in your life to support our nation's moms and moms-to-be. We strive to make the United States the healthiest place in the world for mothers to give birth. I want to close by speaking directly about the pressing issue of COVID-19. We're approaching 7.3 million American cases diagnosed, and sadly, more than 210,000 people have succumbed to the virus. But I want you to know that we've also seen quite a bit of progress in the last 10 months. We've learned more about this virus and how to treat it in 10 months than we've learned about any other virus in 10 years in the history of this planet. It was well over a decade before we had good tests for HIV. It was longer than that before we actually had therapeutics for HIV. And we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. So again, we need to recognize we've made a lot of progress, even though we still have a lot of work yet to do. We've ramped up medical supplies and personal protective equipment, going from about 10,000 ventilators in our strategic national stockpile to currently over 100,000 ventilators in our stockpile. And I want to make sure I leave time for questions, but there are ethical dilemmas embedded in that. If I, as Surgeon General, could go back in time a year ago to October of 2019, if I had walked to Congress, which I can look out my window and see the Capitol right now, and said, I want you to give me $4 or $5 billion to buy 100,000 ventilators, I would have been run out of town. Yet, just a few months after that, we were being lambasted for not having 100,000 ventilators in the strategic national stockpile. What are the ethical considerations of trying to stock up for something which has not yet occurred, and the trade-offs for where that money could otherwise be spent today? That's something that we're going to need to continue to think about when we look at preparedness over the next several months and years post-COVID. I want you to learn that we've learned of how to protect our seniors much better. Remember, in the beginning of this pandemic, the majority of deaths were occurring in nursing homes. That dynamic has actually changed thanks to what we've learned about the virus and improvements we've made. We've improved in-hospital treatment, decreasing length of stay and mortality rate. We now have remdesivir, steroids. COVID-19 is no longer the death sentence that it was, again, just 7-8 months ago, when 30-40% of people diagnosed with it were actually succumbing to it. Now it's less than 5%. We also know what works to keep communities safe. We anticipate a vaccine by the end of this year. There are 4 candidates in phase 3 trials, which is historic. But I'll repeat to you that our best immediate defense against COVID-19 are what I call the 3 W's: washing your hands, watching your distance, and wearing a face mask. These 3 simple measures have been proven to lower the spread of this deadly disease. I've launched a messaging campaign to help spread this information to the public called #COVIDStopsWithMe. And if you have your phones, I'd ask that you go to my Twitter account at Surgeon_General and to share that video with everyone else, because COVID really does stop with each and every one of us. I want to close with a message specifically for you students. It's for everyone, but I want you to think about this, particularly if you're a student. I know, statistically speaking, that most of you haven't received the flu shot in the past because you don't think the shot is effective or necessary. But this year, I want you to know it is more important than ever. Part of achieving and maintaining good health is receiving regular vaccinations, including the flu shot. So talk to your friends and family who may be vaccine hesitant, and go to vaccines.gov to get your questions answered about flu vaccinations and other vaccinations. We want to ensure as many Americans in their communities are protected against preventable illnesses as possible. It's a quick and easy step you can take to make sure we keep hospitalizations low and beds available for individuals with COVID-19 and other severe conditions. Vaccines save lives, but they're most effective when the greatest number of people receive it. I also want to make it real for you because I know that as students, many of you aren't worried about the flu taking your life. But I want you to think about the fact that we have 7.3 million people who've been diagnosed with COVID, 30 to 40% probably asymptomatic. So let's say 5 million people going around with symptoms of COVID-19 so far this year, and the panic that's wreaked on our communities. 39 million people were diagnosed with the flu in the United States last year. 39 million people. Imagine if we have 39 million people this year going around with fever, with cough, with runny nose. We're going to be shutting down schools. We're going to be shutting down colleges. We're going to be shutting down workplaces. You may be denied entry because you have a mild fever due to having a flu that could have been prevented. We really need everyone to understand that for multiple reasons, protecting yourselves, protecting vulnerable people, but also just simply not creating panic in our communities with 39 million people running around with the flu in the midst of a COVID pandemic, that we all need to get our flu shots this year. These are truly unprecedented times, but I remain steadfast, and I want you to remain steadfast, to resolve to use our lessons learned, our scars and our losses as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make our nations healthier, more resilient, and more secure. And you may say, what's he talking about this being an opportunity? If you think back in US history, the times we've had the greatest and the quickest advances in health, in healthcare delivery, and health policy in our country have been after wars, whether it was transfusion therapy or broader use of antibiotics, or discussions about the need to cover people's health care. All of these things occurred after wars, and we're at war with an invisible enemy right now, but that provides us an opportunity to have a national conversation about how we can change some of our fundamentally flawed systems in this country. It's been an honor to be here and speak with you, and I hope we have some time for some questions.
Thank you, sir, for those kind words and the information that you provided. Are there any questions from the audience? Who wants to be first? Who wants to be second? Mr. Surgeon General, she says that was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause, please. We do have a question. As the nation's doctor, what are you doing to speak truth to power on behalf of the safety of the American people?
Well, that is a wonderful question. And one of the things that I'm doing is heading up the Public Health Service Commission Corps. A lot of people don't realize that the Surgeon General of the United States is actually the operational head of one of the 8 uniformed services. There's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, which you all know about. Coast Guard is the Jeopardy question, but there's also the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the now Space Force, and the Public Health Service. And we respond to wildfires, to hurricanes, to natural disasters and man-made disasters, mass shootings. But we also have stood up testing sites around the country. And so one of the things that I would say to you is I appreciate where that question is coming from. There are tens of thousands of people who are public servants in this country. And they took an oath to try to keep the trains running in terms of making sure you get the services you need, that your roads get paved, that your hospitals stay open, that your grandmother's nursing home is inspected and safe. And it is important to recognize that not everyone is in a position to go out there and be an activist for every cause that they would like to be. And so one of the things that I am doing is simply being at the table and making sure we're having discussions about health disparities on the coronavirus task force, making sure we are standing up testing sites around the country. And 70% of our testing sites have been put in socially vulnerable areas as designated by the CDC. And the other thing I would say is that I'm, by being here, able to go out and advocate on the news and on the radio. And so that's what I am doing to try to continue to speak truth to power. I think it's critically important that we talk about disparities, that we talk about health inequity. And one of the things that I would say, and I don't want to go on too long here, but when you think about the social justice movement we're having in this country right now, it was sparked because of police shootings. That's an issue where people want to say, what are you doing to speak truth to power? I want you to understand that about 1,000 people every year total die in police encounters. 40,000 people died last year from the flu. And a disproportionate number of them were Black and brown, because we know that Black and brown people are much less likely to get a flu shot than white people. So one of the ways we will achieve social justice is by promoting health equity. And one of the fastest, easiest, quickest ways to promote health equity is to promote vaccinations, and particularly flu vaccinations. So I want you all to know that I grew up in the country. I grew up in a rural area on an old farm. Interestingly enough, a tobacco farm, considering that the Surgeon General has a warning on the side of cigarette boxes. I also have asthma. And one of the things that I always do when I have the opportunity is show people I still carry my inhaler around with me. Many of you know that my brother actually was incarcerated and recently released due to crimes he committed to support his substance use disorder. My mother had a stroke this year. And I'm not telling you all these stories so that you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you these stories because one way to speak truth to power is to be at the table and to represent these viewpoints, which aren't always represented in some of the conversations that happen here in Washington, D.C. So I'll close by again saying what I'm doing to speak truth to power is trying to represent you by being at the table and making sure your stories, your concerns, the vulnerable people have their views brought forward when we're developing policies.
Thank you, sir. Sir, please share your journey through the Meyerhoff Scholars Program and how these prepared you to serve as Surgeon General.
Great question. So the Meyerhoff Scholars Program is a program that provides scholarship money in an undergraduate setting for people who either are minorities or people who are committed to helping address disparities in this country. It was started over 30 years ago, and I was one of the original Meyerhoff scholars. I was in their 4th class. What it also does is provide opportunities for people to do research. And so I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Africa, I've worked for a Nobel Prize winner. And all of those things helped provide me not just with opportunities to get into medical school, but they also provided me with a perspective that has allowed me, I think, to be able to speak to and for many different groups of people all across the country. One of my favorite quotes, other than people need to know that you care before they care what you know, is Mark Twain's quote. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. So young people, travel as much as you can right now, because the world is not just a big place. The United States is a very big place. And people in Dallas, Texas, think very differently than people in Boston, Massachusetts. People in Clemson, South Carolina, sometimes think very differently and have different priorities than people in Berkeley, California, where I got my master's in public health. But I do want to highlight that the pipeline is very concerning to me for minorities. There are less African-American males going to medical school right now than what there were 40 years ago. I'm going to say that again. Less Black males are going to and graduating from medical school right now than 40 years ago. So we need to support programs that support the pipeline, because we know that there's only so much you can do with cultural competency training, but that study after study shows that people receive better care and have better trust when they're being taken care of by individuals who look like, think like, talk like them, come from backgrounds that they come from. So that goes back to the first question you asked me. By being at the table, that's one of the things that I'm doing to promote health equity, simply because there are people out there who can relate to me as a Black male doctor in a way that they might never be able to relate to someone else out there who doesn't look like them and who doesn't come from their backgrounds. So again, know that the pipeline is an issue. We need to have a society of healthcare professionals that is representative of the people they serve. And the more that we can promote that, the healthier our nation will become.
Thank you. What are some best practices for universities to provide better mental health support during COVID?
Great question, great question. One of the things that we need to do is destigmatize mental health and substance use disorder. Unfortunately, we know that people are reticent to admit that they're anxious or that they're depressed. Young people out there, you all can help lead the way, because studies show that younger people are less reticent to acknowledge mental health issues. So you can help the older people out there understand that, look, being depressed doesn't make you weak any more than having high blood pressure makes you weak, any more than being diagnosed with cancer makes you weak. It's interesting how certain diseases we say, poor you, but other diseases we say, that's your fault. So we need to really destigmatize mental health, and the university can help do that by fostering conversation, talking about it, normalizing it. And as students, you can do that too. I think we need to make mental health services more widely available and accessible by promoting hotlines for people who are feeling low. 1-800-273-TALK is a national hotline you can call if you need help. Also providing telehealth services, providing services in a non-stigmatizing format. So people may be reticent to go in to see the psychiatrist because it's in a place where everyone knows, oh, well, they must have an issue going on. But telehealth visits or integrating it into regular checkups is, I think, an important way to address it. But then also having a conversation about substance use, because we know a lot of substance use starts in the age that people are when they're in high school and when they're in college. So encouraging people to learn about the fact that the brain continues to develop until about age 25, and that you could be priming your brain for a lifetime of addiction if you are misusing substances while you are in college. And you can go to surgeongeneral.gov and see my advisory that I released. I have two of them. I have one on marijuana use in the developing brain, helping people understand the dangers of newly normalized and much more potent marijuana out there on brains that are still developing. But also I have an advisory on e-cigarette use in younger people. Again, the delivery of nicotine through Juul, through these other products, Puff Bar, et cetera, is much higher than you would get even in a cigarette. So it's the perfect product to get you addicted to nicotine and to keep you a customer for the rest of your life. So these are all things we should be thinking about. But the final point I'd make that the university can do, especially in the midst of a pandemic, is to try to create healthy opportunities for people to lower their stress, their anxiety, to decrease incidence of depression. And that's, again, encouraging healthy eating and making sure it's available, encouraging outdoor activities and encouraging people to go out and be active, but then providing virtual forums like this one where I can interact with you and where you may be able to interact with other people while still maintaining social distance.
Thank you, sir. How do you go about balancing the best practices from a public health standpoint with logistical constraints such as limited testing capabilities and other constraints such as politics or interests of your superiors?
Well, this is a once-in-a-century pandemic. You're going to be talking about this to your grandkids, the way people talk about the 1918 flu pandemic still today. But there's not a page in the pandemic playbook for a presidential impeachment trial. And people often say, why can't we come together as a nation? But it's easy to forget that just 10 short months ago, as we were learning about COVID-19 and needing to come together, that our country literally was historically at each other's throats in an impeachment trial. There's no page in the pandemic playbook for a presidential election where both sides have said that they're running on their handling of the pandemic. There's no page in the pandemic playbook for a social justice movement, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 1960s, before most of you all were born. Incredibly important to understand that's the context so that when we have conversations, we can try to depoliticize those conversations. We can really try to not bring our own biases into a conversation. I found that many times when I'm talking about health, or when I think I'm talking about health, people automatically go into political mode. Just think about if I say hydroxychloroquine, what does that trigger in your mind? Think about if I say vaccines, what does that trigger in your mind? Even if I say PPE, a lot of people fall into these tribal political mindsets versus really thinking, what do we need to be doing and talking about from a health promotion perspective? So what I try to do is really talk directly to individuals. One of the things that I get asked is, how come we don't see you on TV as much anymore? Well, interestingly enough, I still do just as much, if not more TV, but I'm doing a lot more regional TV. You may have seen me because I've done some South Carolina stations, and I was just in South Carolina about a month ago. I find that when I do regional TV, people really do just want to talk about health and know how they stay safe. When I do national TV, every question I get is framed through the lens of, well, what do you think about the president? Or the president said this. Or again, it's through some political lens. And so I try to get into communities. I try to talk to people. I try to get to know them because, again, people need to know that you care before they care what you know. And that's done well for me throughout my career. Again, I was able to get a syringe service program through in a state where it was illegal and highly controversial. And I did it with that approach. It's the way I approach my patients, and I still practice medicine. I've taken care of white supremacists with swastikas tattooed all over them. I've taken care of people who cursed me out. At the end of the day, it's my job as a physician to take care of you and to try to speak to you no matter who you are. And I can't use language or have an approach that causes half of the population, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, to think that I'm judging you or shutting you down. So that's the way I approach it. And I'll just continue to pray. I'll continue to try to engage, and I'll try to keep continuing to try to focus on health and hope that cooler heads prevail once we get through the next 3 weeks. And I do suspect that a lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the dynamics will change on all sides on November 4th.
Thank you. These two appear to be the same about the constraints. Who said that question forward? Okay. says, thank you, Dr. Adams, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. And then it goes on to say, many public health officials are burdened by the need to consider the politics of recommending public health measures. As Surgeon General of the United States, you have this responsibility at the highest level. How do you go about balancing the best? That's what we just asked, I believe. No? I'll read it anyway, sir.
Well, no, I get the question, and it's similar to what I just asked, so I won't give you too long of an answer. But one of the things I will say is that public health officials are being attacked like never before. We've seen many state health officers and local health officers quit or be forced out. The Ohio health official was actually forced out because there were people parading outside of her home with guns. And she said, I can't subject my family to this anymore. Again, we need to try to separate the politics from the health policies. We need to support our local health officers. We need to understand that things change very rapidly in an environment where you've got a novel virus. Now, we have to look inside ourselves and say, what are our biases that we're bringing to the table, and to try to put them aside. A lot of the questions I get from people, even medical people, about the pandemic, really and truly at their core are political questions based on their political orientation, more so than they are health questions about what we need to do to come together and move forward. One of the things that I'll say that's perhaps a little bit controversial is that my worry is that there are a lot of people out there who hate their political opponent more than they hate the virus. And what do I mean by that? If you had to make a choice, and this is a rhetorical exercise here, but if you could get rid of the virus today with a snap of your fingers, but that meant that the person who you didn't want to be president got to be president, which would you choose? And again, we're not face to face. You don't have to answer that question to me, but that's the dynamic we're in right now, where I think there may be some people out there who, instead of coming together to fight this virus, and on all sides, would rather use it as a political tool, or at the very least, don't want to do anything that could be perceived as helping their enemy win the election. I had a conversation with CeCe Winans, who's the greatest selling gospel artist of all time. We had a conversation just about COVID because we wanted the Black community to understand how we keep ourselves safe from COVID and the concerns that we should have. There were a lot of people, most of them in the Black community, who shamed CeCe Winans for daring to talk to Trump's Surgeon General. And I'll remind you that the Surgeon General of the United States is an apolitical position. You get appointed similar to a federal judge, or to a judge, if you will. But once you're in that role, your job is to represent everybody. I'm the nation's doctor. I'm not the Republicans' doctor, even though I was appointed by a Republican administration. And when it comes to issues of health and health equity, they're too important to take 4 years or 4 months, or in the midst of a pandemic, 4 weeks off. But a lot of people, quite frankly, have made the decision that no one should engage with this administration in any way, shape, or form for the next several weeks until we get through the election, because heaven forbid that makes the administration or any part of the administration look good. And I go down that pathway, not really to try to defend myself, but to help you understand some of the complex situations that I'm in and the difficulties that I'm having, but also so that you understand ethically, people are making decisions each and every day, even in how they frame questions or approaches to the pandemic, that are prioritizing one thing, their desire to beat a political opponent, over another thing, a chance that they may be helping us in our fight against this virus. And again, I hope that we can all come together. I'm quite frankly not optimistic that it will happen anytime before the election, but I hope that we can get through the election without too much harm being done to our nation, and that after the election, everyone really can come together And what I would promise you all is that I will continue to do my best to be America's doctor and to be apolitical. Final point, a lot of people say things like, why don't you speak truth to power? Or why don't you say this person is wrong or that person's wrong? What I would say to you is, I don't criticize Democrats or Republicans. I've found in my life and in my approach, and I have a degree in psychology, actually, that positive reinforcement usually wins the day over negative interactions with people. And so it's not that I won't criticize one group. I don't criticize anyone. I try not to. I try to say, hey, 86% of the public is wearing masks. So instead of focusing on the 14% who aren't, let's focus on the 86% who in Gallup polls say that they're actually wearing masks and normalize that positive behavior. Let's continue to talk about the good things that are occurring and that people can do. And that's honestly just been my approach to try to keep things as apolitical as possible, because the second you start criticizing, then people start tuning you out and they start associating you through their political lens instead of seeing you as an objective purveyor of health information.
Thank you, sir. On the topic of ethics and empathy, as a practicing physician, what books would you recommend for a student hoping to go into medicine?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. There is a book called The Servant, and it's a book that really talks about how you take an empathetic approach to problems and interactions in your day-to-day life and beyond. Another book that I actually really love, if you haven't read it, which is in a completely different vein, is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Why is that a book that I'd recommend? Because a lot of our country tends to blame health problems on people's individual behaviors and tends to feel that people who are successful because solely of their own hard work. But Outliers points out the fact that, yes, it does take hard work to be successful, but that in many cases, a lot of people work hard, but they don't have opportunities for success or for health to the degree that other people do. And in that context, when you look historically, it can explain a lot of why some people actually have persevered. And in Outliers, they talk about Bill Gates. They talk about the Beatles. They talk about a number of other famous groups or examples. But then they also talk about some of the examples of people who worked just as hard and were just as smart, but didn't succeed because they didn't have equitable opportunities for health. So those are two books that I read that really, I think, impacted the way I look at the world. And they're both really quick, relatively quick reads, but also really interesting reads. So those are two I'd recommend.
Thank you, sir. Are there others? What recommendations do you provide for faculty to help our students, members of our community, and policymakers to understand the impact of climate change on health at the present time and for the long-term future? Great question. And it goes back to people need to know you care before they care what you know. When I talk to public health students or health students, I actually often give them a climate change example. And here's the very brief story I will tell them. I go to West Virginia quite a bit as Surgeon General. Number one, they've got pretty high obesity rates. Number two, they were one of the hardest hit communities by the opioid epidemic. There are many reasons for me to go there. And I will tell you that I've been to many communities in West Virginia where a significant proportion, greater than 50% of the community, is dependent directly or indirectly on the coal industry. I also know that in the last presidential election, a candidate went to West Virginia and said, if I win, I'm shutting down the coal mines. And what I would say to people is,
I know that candidate was saying this in the context of climate change and was thinking that this was a conversation about science and about protecting our planet. But if you're an individual who lives in one of those communities where your granddaddy worked for the coal mine, your daddy worked for the coal mine, and your only real prospect for being able to get a job and put food on the table is the coal mine, and someone comes in and says, I'm going to shut down the coal mine, you're not having a conversation about climate change anymore or science. You're having a conversation about their ability to feed their family. And the number one issue people vote on, if you look at Gallup polls, and you can look this up right now, Democrat or Republican, black or white, rural or urban, is jobs in the economy. People rarely vote on health as one of the top 3 to 5 things that they vote on in a presidential election. The number 2 issue is safety and security. That's why every person who's ever run for mayor says, I'm going to bring jobs to the town. I'm going to keep the streets safe. We need to understand that, and we need to speak to people in a way that resonates. Again, people need to know that you care before they care what you know, and people aren't going to feel like you care if they feel like you're threatening their livelihood. So here's what I did. I start at the end and work backwards, because really, in many cases in this country, we were fighting over policy vehicles and then ignoring the fact or disregarding the fact that we ultimately believe in the same destination, even if we think that there are different vehicles to get there. So if I was talking to someone and I wanted to have a conversation about climate change, I would say, hey, I'm a parent. Wouldn't you agree that we should try as hard as we can to leave the best possible world for our children, and certainly to leave a better place for them than the one that our parents left for us? Going to be very hard to find anyone, if you start with that, who says, I disagree with you. Then you say, well, don't you think there are some things that we could do from a policy perspective or in our day-to-day lives to try to create a better planet for individuals? Most people will say, yeah, okay. Okay, then let's think through some of the things that we can do in our community or in our day-to-day lives to create that world. What about A? Nope. Okay, well, what about B? Okay, yeah, maybe B. What about C? Well, it depends on how we'd implement that. And you kind of back into the conversation, starting with the destination in mind that we all will likely agree on, instead of a particular policy vehicle. That's the same conversation, but yet it's a very different conversation than coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to shut down the coal mines. And so I think we need to have a more empathetic conversation about climate change and understand where people are coming from before we just hit people over the head with a sledgehammer in the name of science. The science is important, but people aren't going to care what you know until you show them that you care about them. And that starts with sitting down, having that conversation, and really recognizing where they're coming from. A lot of people actually agree on health. They just don't agree with the mechanisms that people will bring to bear or are proposing to get there. I had a conversation earlier today about mask wearing. Again, 86% of people are wearing masks. People who are opposed aren't necessarily anti-mask so much as they are anti-government and anti-mandate. And if you understand that, then you can actually have a conversation with them, and in many cases, help a lot of them understand how they benefit from choosing to wear a mask, whereas they're going to resist you from the start. If you go in and say, you're an idiot because you don't wear a mask, and if you don't do it, I, in the name of the government, am going to make you do it. I don't know how many of you all have teenage kids, but one of the surest ways to make sure kids don't do what you want them to do is to tell them, I'm going to make you do it. One of the best ways to get them to do it is to engage them, to help them understand how they benefit from it, and then they're going to be more likely to participate.
Thank you, sir. I believe that has just about wrapped up all the questions. I'd like to get your thought, though, on how impactful was it to leave that tobacco farm and go off to college?
Well, it's another story I tell. I never even thought about the prospect of being a doctor when I was in high school. I had a 3.9 GPA through high school. So it wasn't that I didn't have the aptitude, the ability, but I just never met another Black doctor in my life until I got to college. And that's why being in this position, being a role model to other people simply by being here and them seeing me is so incredibly important. And I want you all to understand that there is no job you're going to have in your life where you are likely going to have 100% autonomy to do whatever the heck you want without any consequences. Every job we have comes with opportunities and comes with limitations or guardrails. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to think about when you're in jobs is, are you in a job that's providing more upside than downside for you and for your mission? And as Surgeon General of the United States, I feel that for many of the reasons I articulated, being able to represent people of color, people with chronic medical conditions, people from rural communities, being able to be a role model to young people out there, being able to serve in uniform and go out and protect communities when they've been hit hard by different medical and health issues. I still feel like I am doing more good being in this role than harm, or certainly than the harm of having someone who doesn't represent these positions and come from these places and have these perspectives in this role, or having no one at all in this role. So I appreciate the opportunity to serve as your United States Surgeon General, and I want you to know that we need to do everything we can to make sure everyone out there believes that they can be Surgeon General of the United States one day by supporting programs that promote pipelines, by supporting representation in different areas, and again, by trying to keep the politics as much as possible out of some of these larger health discussions so that everyone feels that they can have an opportunity to give their input. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I wish I was there in person, and hopefully next year I can, or sometime in the future, I can participate in person, because I'd love to check out one of those football games that you all have down there. I hear they're a pretty big deal. And the more you all participate with the 3 Ws, the more you do the little things that you can do in your lives, the quicker we'll get back to normal.
Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, everyone.